take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
I know in a lot of episodes we talk about mental health and, a lot of the things that come up you hear is like, meditation, exercise, and the term mindfulness. And it's funny, when I was reaching out to get to, a little bit more of an answer on what mindfulness is, I kind of realized I don't even know what mindfulness truly means. So I'm really pleased to be joined here by the co-founders of the Mindful Project, Dr. Rachel Lindvall and Erin McLeod. How are you two? Thank you for joining me.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us on.
So you might know Erin McLeod's name. She is probably one of the best soccer players our country has ever produced in Canada. And Dr. Rachel Lindvall has her PhD in mindfulness. So before we kind of get into this conversation, Doctor, if you don't mind, can you just give a little bit of a kind of basic baseline of what mindfulness actually is?
Yeah, I think that you're not alone in wondering what mindfulness is, because a lot of times I think it's a word that's really thrown around quite a bit recently. And the most basic definition is just paying attention on purpose in the present moment in a non-judgmental way.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those terms, like I said, you hear it in the mental health conversation, you hear it in business lingo a lot now, and it's kind of like, yeah, just practice mindfulness. And you're kind of like, yeah, okay. And then that's kind of where it stops. So glad we cleared that out. Now, the Mindful Project, what is it and how did you come to I know it's a big question and probably a lot of journey along the way, but how did you guys come to find it?
Okay, I'll try to give you the Coles Notes version. So I've used mindfulness. I kind of almost by coincidence, I learned to use mindfulness a lot just in my training practice. A lot of breathing techniques, even like self-awareness practice, which is a really big part of mindfulness, and realizing what my strengths and weaknesses are as a human being, not just as a soccer player. And the more I kind of looked into those things, I realized a lot of my happiness and enjoyment of the game was kind of being, I would say, taken out because of my own mind and my own, I was consistently getting in my own way and not dealing with the pressure of performing and my, the anxiety I was feeling before games. And so I kind of started on this like self-improvement path where I was trying to, be the best that I could be and be in the present moment more often. And in sports, you often hear that as the zone, which is also coincidentally like if you're practicing mindfulness, and like Rachel talked about, just being in that moment where there's no thought and you're just like totally, whether you're focusing on your breath or whatever it is, the running monologue isn't constantly going. And so it had a really big impact on my soccer, but also just in the quality of my life. And Rachel and I met, her and her husband are university soccer coaches. So they kind of were touring Europe this one year, looking for inspiration for soccer training in different leagues around the world for women. And they ended up taking me out to dinner one night because I was like a broke athlete living in Europe. And I said, free meal, let's do this. And we kind of sat down and, Rachel was already doing a lot of research and, getting educated on mindfulness and the impact it was having on athletes. And we just kind of got to talking. And what we both realized is a lot of the things I was having to unlearn, a lot of the bad habits, a lot of the self-talk, and a lot of things I was putting myself through, we start developing those patterns and behaviors as early as 3.5 years old. So we were like, what if we didn't have to unlearn any of this stuff? What if you just kind of went through life with like a growth mindset where you saw mistakes as like challenges and good things? And anyway, the conversation went back and forth, and that was a long-winded version of the answer, but that was kind of like where the Mindful Project was born.
Right. So I found that interesting. When you think of professional athletes, a lot of the time, I come from a hockey background, and funny enough, I played goalie, and, you always were taught, focus on the next shot. Don't worry about anything else. Just period by period, just focus on shot by shot by shot. Putting it in that terms, I guess that is a practice of mindfulness. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's basically training your brain to be in that moment. And I also am a goalkeeper, so we're, got our own little soccer and hockey union going on right here.
Amazing.
But yeah, it's basically it's training your brain to be in that moment. You're not worried about the score line. You're not worried about what's happened before or what might happen next. You're literally just putting yourself in that moment and doing everything you can do to control the game in that moment. As that goalkeeper, there's you're moving, you're adjusting, you're talking, everything that you're needing to do in that moment versus, again, trying to predict the future or correct the past.
Right. And I'm happy that you two both understand that talking to yourself is not weird as a goalie. It's completely normal. So I'm interested. So, I mean, this has been part of, I guess, when you put it in those terms, a part of our conversation, especially when it comes to sport for, generations at this point. But when did it start to become a little bit more mainstream and, a little bit delving deeper into the science behind it?
Well, if you remember in the 90s, if you were a Michael Jordan fan, or if anyone listening was a Michael Jordan fan, you remember I was this huge Michael Jordan fan. I had like posters all over my walls. And you remember, if you followed him at all, then you heard basically that Phil Jackson of Bulls were using mindfulness. And they talked about using meditation. And it was Dr. George Mumford that actually was working with them at the time, or excuse me, it might be George Mumford. I can't remember if he's a doctor or not, but he wrote a book called The Mindful Athlete. And so he was involved with them and working on mindfulness. And Michael Jordan and several other athletes attributed all of their success, or a lot of their success in the 90s, to using mindfulness. It actually popped up in the 80s with a rowing team that actually used mindfulness. And they attributed their success at the Olympics to using mindfulness. But of course, in the 80s, it was no athletes were really using it. Then in the 90s, it was kind of unique that the Bulls were using it. And I think that research started happening more into the 2000s. So in my research, I think the fact that you're actually getting some, decades long research, you're seeing the positive results that are coming from mindfulness. So I think it's one of those things, just like with anything in the exercise science community or the sports psychology community or just athletics in general, you start getting enough evidence and enough people start talking about it. And pro athletes like Erin saying, hey, this helped me, I attribute my success to this, or it helped me overcome this injury. And I think you start hearing that enough that it starts to become more mainstream. People start accepting it, start using it, and seeing the great benefits that it can have.
Right. Erin, if you don't mind me asking, in the prep for us chatting today, I remember some of your story from, when I don't want to say when I was a kid, but, back
it's okay. It's okay.
But so, I'd watch TSN and, I'd follow along and kind of remember some of the pieces that were done. You went through some difficult points in between 2008 and the 2012 Olympics. What was it that, brought mindfulness to your attention and that you wanted to develop that practice?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll try my best to do Cole's notes, but there's no guarantee. I went to the 2008 Olympics and it was a dream since I was like 5 years old with a mullet. And I was like, this is all I want to do. It's all I cared about. And I got there. And the year before that, I had a conversation with my goalkeeper coach who told me, Erin, you're one of the best goalkeepers in the world. And I was like irate. I was like, I don't want to be one of the best. I want to be the best. This is BS. And so I just started to, focus on just being the best. And I never actually took a minute to like think about what that looks like. And in my head, I had kind of thought, well, and this is from when I was like 5 years old, watching some of my heroes on TV and listening to the commentators saying that, performances were flawless and there was no mistakes and they were perfect. And so I had this idea in my head that being the best meant making no mistakes. So you can probably guess how that went. It became kind of like this trap. Playing every game that I played, I was afraid I was going to make mistakes. And Rachel often speaks to, and I think it's just genius, just 30% of the time our thoughts generally are in the past. 60% of the time our thoughts are about the future, and only 10% we live in that like present moment. And me having like a very fixed mindset and thinking that mistakes meant that I didn't have any self-worth and I wasn't the best and all these things like kept me very much out of the present moment. So I was consistently underperforming. And, I just remember the 2008 Olympics, like everyone's like, oh, it's the time of your life. And I was totally miserable. I was afraid to step on the field. Off the field, it was, it was awesome. I'm getting selfies with Messi and Aguero. And I'm like, this is the dream. But like on the field, it was a mental trap. And I tore my ACL in that tournament. And I remember feeling relieved just because I was like, thank God, like, that's how bad it had become. And so, with injuries, you have a lot of time to yourself and a lot of time to reflect. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, I worked so hard and put my whole heart into this to like hate this sport. So I took a step back and started reevaluating like how I learn, my self-awareness. I started like thinking, okay, why are mistakes so bad? Why do I make them out to be so bad? So that was kind of identifying my mindset was the first step. And then I had the absolute pleasure of working with this man named Dr. Kerry Evans, who is now working with the New Zealand All Blacks. He's a genius, wonderful guy. And his like life motto is presence comes from being present in the moment. And I was like, this is my guy. I asked him like, how do I stay in the present moment? Like I'm all over the place worrying about this and that. And he was like, breathe in for 3 seconds and exhale for 4 and count while you do it. And that was it. And I was like, okay. And funny enough, there's science behind it. And I know Rachel's smiling, I can see her, but the longer out breath activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps you make clearer decisions. You're more calm. And then the counting for me, just like when the running monologue's going and then I just focused on counting, then I was just focusing on the counting and my breath, and it brought me right back to the moment. And that is really mindfulness at its core, right? So I started doing that in training. I started doing that like off the field, in games. But even just like being more process oriented, like he was wonderful. I remember one training session, I was like, my voice, and as a goalkeeper, you're supposed to give information. And I was like, no. That was my tone the whole time. And anyone in their right mind would drown that out, right? So I would start focusing on, even the tone of my voice and the way I was speaking to people, the way I was commanding, and just small things like that really just like took my game to another level. And the 2012 Olympics, I made a lot of mistakes in that tournament, but I didn't get held up by them. I was able to get right back into the present moment. Afterwards, I could like analyze video and like take learnings from it, but I kept coming back to the present moment. And, we ended up winning a bronze, and it was a wonderful tournament. But the coolest thing about it is I just really fell in love with the game again. And I think that was like the most rewarding part of my journey.
Right.
Long story there.
I always say never apologize for long stories.
Yeah.
It's truly fascinating stuff. And, when it comes to someone like myself, and like I was saying off the top, when you're talking about mindfulness and, you kind of hear it and you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, breathing. But when you hear it come from a professional athlete and, that concrete kind of like, no, this helped me do this, it makes people listen. It gives that validity to it that some people kind of, crave when they want information, unfortunately, not everyone likes to sit and lecture and take everything in, which is unfortunate, but kind of the reality of how people learn. Doctor, I'd like to kind of dive into just a little bit of the science behind it. So, when we talk about things like meditation, about breathing, Erin touched on it just very briefly, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. What is it about breathing and being present in this moment? What are some of the things that like science tells us that it does and makes that difference?
Yeah, thanks for asking so I can geek out a little bit because I absolutely love this. Because just a little backstory, I went into my doctoral research not planning on researching mindfulness.
Oh,
I actually started researching because I've coached college women for 20 years, and I always felt like I connected well with them, and I already had a master's in exercise science and sports psychology, and had done a lot of I have a certified mental coach. I had things that I was already using to help them mentally, but I just this next generation of athletes I was missing on, and I was like, what's different? And they were more anxious. They had more fear of failure. They're just more stressed out. I'm also a college professor, so I was seeing it in the classroom too, not just with my athletes. And so I started wondering, like, is it just me or is this a thing? So I actually started researching stress and anxiety in what we call the emerging adult population. So that's basically like late high school up all the way through like graduate school students. And the research showed that stress, anxiety, fear of failure, depression, like pretty much all of the horrible mental health things, right, are like through the roof with this population. And then even down all the way into that elementary school population, which is really disconcerting. And so as I was researching this, mindfulness kept coming up as a mitigator or something that actually would reduce a lot of these symptoms. And so you obviously have people that say it's helping. You're like, okay, but what is the actual physiological side of things, right?
yeah.
So that's what I think is so cool is that breathing, like Erin was saying, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body down. So think about you're getting ready for a big event or something that you're nervous for, that heart rate automatically goes up, which is good to an extent because it's getting more blood and oxygen where it needs to go. But when our heart rate is over 120, we actually can't think as clearly. And then over 150, you really can't think as clearly. So when I'm telling my goalkeepers, like, hey, I know that your defender should know to do that, but they're sprinting their butt back on defense right now, and they are not going to remember that that's what they should do because that heart rate is elevated. So in that same sense, we don't think as clearly when our heart rate is up. And also another thing is that stress hormone cortisol, right? So using breathing, using meditation or mindfulness practice is shown to bring stress hormone cortisol down. Like it actually reduces the production of it in our body. It also reduces blood pressure and also I just blanked on the other one. We're talking about heart rate, we're talking about blood pressure, we're talking about cortisol. But basically, there's another stress hormone that our body produces that it also lowers. And I just geek out because you can't argue with the physiology. Like you can't argue with actually taking these tests. Another thing it does is it actually regulates heart rate variability. Now, heart rate variability is when something surprises you or something comes at you that you weren't anticipating. Even for academics, it could be a pop quiz. For something on the field, it could just be something that you didn't expect. And so that heart rate can jump, right? Which essentially that heart rate jumping, it's kind of that panic moment. And people who participated in 6 weeks of mindfulness, their heart rate variability, when kind of like scared for a second, it actually came back to normal significantly more quickly. Like they had more control of their own heart rate, which I think is nerdy cool.
Yeah. I love seeing how excited you get about it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why Erin knows I love to geek out on this stuff. But mindfulness wasn't something that I was even on my radar as far as something to research. I was aware of it, I was aware of it, through pro athletes and other things, but I hadn't really, I was kind of like, well, everyone kind of uses their own thing. But then when the science is irrefutable science, which I think is just outstanding. So, and then using it with my own athletes, just seeing the great results with them it's just been exciting. In my classroom, using it with my students, seeing their stress levels coming down, their anxiety coming down. It's just really exciting to actually see it with our own product and in our own lives, as well as in the research.
Yeah, and it must kind of be nice that you can kind of like you safely experiment with different things without, causing harm to anybody. When you think, it's funny that you bring up, the young. I always call them millennials because that's what everyone does, but it's Generation Z and everything like that. But my peers and even me now becoming a manager and having people under me, those are things that you really have to be conscious of. It's a very new mentality of how to run a workplace, how to run a sports team, um, everything about that. So, you know, it doesn't have to just apply to sport, which is what I find so interesting. It applies to business, to your workplace. What I'm curious to ask about, you mentioned how you're using it with your students. What are some things, because I know here in Ottawa, where I'm from, Ottawa U, before the pandemic, was having a crisis with, students and suicide. It's a very anxious time. What are some of the things that you're doing with your students in the classroom, if you don't mind sharing, that seem to be working and helping them out?
Yeah, so this semester, one of my classes, it's psychosocial dimensions of kinesiology. Basically, it's the sports psychology and the sociology of sport kind of mixed together. And so in that class, we actually are doing our adult program. So the Mindful Project adult program. Our class meets 3 days a week, and so we're doing the program 3 days a week. And so we essentially it's giving them the foundational elements of mindfulness. Also, Erin mentioned earlier the growth mindset, and essentially it's giving them kind of a curriculum to learn how to think differently. Because essentially, what study shows with mindfulness is that the concept of non-judgment, and even being in the present moment, it helps bring our stress down because we view things differently. And so it's essentially helping them look at their own world differently. One of my students, she was taking a class that she says, I'm horrible at this subject. And she was really, not looking forward to it. And when it came to the first test, she said that before she sat down, and she said, basically just breathe in, breathe out, and said, just focus on one question at a time. And she got a very high B, and she's struggled to get C's in this before. And right now I just talked to her the other day, and she said, I am like at an A minus right now. She was so excited. And she's in our class, doing our program 3 days a week. And so essentially it's giving that the way the program works is we have a little cartoon. We have some cartoon characters that share the information. And they kind of give the concept for the week. Each week we build on a curriculum as far as giving them the tools to be able to handle what's going on in their daily life and be able to better use mindfulness in their life. So we have a little cartoon that introduces the subject. And then we have a guided audio, which is Erin's soothing voice that basically helps them with their breathing, and then also some imagery and applying the technique of that day. And then we have a journal that they reflect in. And so that's twice a week, and then on the third day is like a review, and then we also do mindful coloring. And it may sound kind of silly to say mindful coloring, but Erin's sister actually made these awesome designs, and we have, so we play music that another friend of ours created for us. And actually, no, Erin made the music. I take that back. Erin did the piano. And so essentially my students, when the music changes, we have to, you color with a different color when you hear it go faster, color different color when it goes slower. And just being able to focus on the changes in the music takes your brain from anywhere else. And it just basically relaxes it, and it gives it just that mental break that we have such a hard time doing. So that's kind of in the nutshell what our program is and what I've been doing with my class this semester.
That's super interesting. And I love the incorporation of arts, music, of, coloring, cartoons that, it takes me to a bunch of conversations I've had with previous guests about the connection with the arts and mental health and all these things and how you use them all together. It's super, super interesting. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and we actually did that intentionally. Like that's something that, as Erin and I were sitting down and deciding how we wanted to this program to look, we looked at the research as far as the art-based side of it. Some people respond really, really well, especially kids from more troubled backgrounds. The research has shown that they really connect with the art, and some of us connect with it regardless of our background. But it's another way of expressing ourselves and connecting with mindfulness, and just even having the cartoons, having the audio, having the reflection, all of it is intentional because part of my doctoral program was learning about learning. And so we basically, the more ways that you can put something together, so you can hear it, you can read it, you can see a cartoon of it, actual visual, reflecting on it, imagining it, listening to it, and then writing. So basically all of the things that we're doing are intentional so that we create what's called durable memories. Durable memories are those memories like of that jingle, when you were a kid, of that advertisement, that you like hear something and all of a sudden you're singing this thing that's been in your head forever. The durable memory is something that basically is there and it doesn't leave. And so that's what we're trying to do with our program, is to create something that is a durable memory so that people can use it whenever they need to use it and not be like, oh, that's great, I'm learning this, but then I forgot when the time came that they needed to use it.
Right. It sounds like me in math for sure. um, Erin, I'm curious, when we were talking about professional athletes and training, you think of people in the gym, doing all sorts, going for runs, all these different workouts, I'm interested, once you learn mindfulness, what did you take from it, and did you incorporate anything into your training? So I guess the question I'm asking, just to kind of condense it a little, what were some of the big differences of your training before mindfulness and after mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference is just was my focus. And I mean, I think it was mindfulness, but also like, and part of mindfulness is self-awareness, but kind of addressing my mindset. I was very like outcome focused with a lot of my goals, as far as like, I wanted to be the #1 keeper for Canada. I wanted to win this. I wanted to do this. And a lot of them were outcome focused goals. And the one thing about mindfulness, like really being in the moment, is most of my goals became more like process oriented. So for example, like, I consider myself one of the best in the world at dealing with crosses. And, I've been asked, well, what's your secret? And I literally just pay attention to the spin on the ball. Every time I set my feet and I'm looking for the ball to come, I'm just looking for the seams on the ball. And that's it. If I'm going to go kick a ball and I'm doing a side volley, for example, like I'm going to, point my shoulders to the direction I want the ball to go. So I just became much more in the moment. Like even like when you go kick a ball, my dad has been my coach for a really long time, and he'd always be like, look at the ball, because he's obsessed with golf, and he's like, the best golfers in the world look at the ball, like look down at the ground and the ball's already gone and they're still looking at the ground, and then they look up, but it's exactly the same. You look at where you want to hit the ball, and it just actually like focus directly on the one thing that I'm doing, and just really being in that moment and noticing those small details just kept me right there. And having said that, I felt like more in control of my body. I didn't feel like things were a fluke or a coincidence. I just felt just more in tune, I guess, with what I was doing. And so that was I would say the biggest difference that I felt, not immediately, but I just kind of started realizing, oh, when I focus on this, it works every time. So it was a shift, but yeah, it was pretty significant. And I do feel like, one thing I wanted to add when Rachel was talking is just the thing I love about mindfulness is like it's different for everybody. And sometimes like I love art. And if I have like had a busy day and my brain is overloaded, and I have a busy day every day, so my brain is always overloaded, and I like sit down at a sketch pad and I draw for like 20 minutes and I don't think for a second. And it's beautiful. And, I was speaking with my aunt yesterday, who's a musician, and, she's like, when I'm playing the guitar, I don't think about anything else. And like the state of flow or the zone, it just shows up differently for a lot of different people. And part of the program, like we just want people to feel empowered to try different types of mindfulness to see what works for them, because we're all so different. And, I'm now in the habit of listening to this loving kindness meditation before sleep. And I'm practicing like gratefulness and a lot of these states of mind that when I'm doing mental training with the national team, that's what we're trying to replicate. So that's why I feel so lucky to be an athlete, because I get to practice these different tools like in sport, but they are for, like you said, in the business place, they apply everywhere.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. As I'm hearing you talk like about all these things, I'm like, oh, like I do that before a big presentation or a pitch, like I'll put on some music and maybe like take some deep breaths before I go in. I'm feeling better. Even before, this conversation and talking to you two, like me just having an anxiety disorder, my heart's pumping. I'm like, okay, no, here we go. It's going to be good. It's going to be fun. And just kind of talking yourself through it, that, you guys coming from the sports background, but like it applies through a date, going on a date. You can apply it to all sorts of things that you might experience that kind of bubbly feeling from.
Absolutely. I was telling Rachel this too. Like I had this awesome conversation with my dad the other day. And I just asked him like straight out, he's been my training partner during the coronavirus, bless him. He's jammed like all of his fingers trying to catch the soccer balls I've hit at him. But in any case, I asked him, I'm like, how do you deal with stress? Like, what do you do? And he's like, well, if I'm really stressed, or, he's retired now, but he's like, if I used to get ready for a big meeting, I would sit at my desk and I would think about, and he used to work in Egypt. He's like, I would think about my favorite golf course in Egypt. And I would think about the first hole and what the par was and what club I would use. And then I would think about the second hole. And, like there was a curve on that, the straightaway. And anyway, he went through like every hole. And I was like, that's like guided relaxation or meditation. And, and it was just, he hadn't coined a term for it, but we do have different coping mechanisms. And I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah. Rachel, I'm very curious to know what came first for you, the research or the practice? When you started reading into it, were you like, kind of like going through it yourself before, as you were like, doing it in part, or did you practice a lot of it before? And then you're like, oh, wait, mindfulness is this thing I've already been doing.
Yeah, I think like you, I realized I had been doing it without realizing it, but I wasn't doing it intentionally. So I think as far as doing it intentionally came after a lot of research, because I think I started researching and I still like, really, can mindfulness do all this? And I kept researching and I was like, okay, maybe. And I kept researching and researching and researching. And I was like, okay, I got to start doing this myself regularly if I'm going to continue researching this. And I mean, the evidence is undeniable when you really are researching it. And so then I started practicing it regularly myself, but I realized, just like you were saying, or like Erin was saying with her dad, that I had used it in the past for various things, but I didn't know at the time that it was mindfulness. So I have used it a lot before, but now it's an intentional practice versus it being like a, undefined, I guess you would say.
Right. I'm curious for both of you. Would journaling be considered part of the mindfulness umbrella?
Yeah, I think that like for us with our journal, we have people use it as a reflection and gratefulness. And I think that that's something that is so important. We also have them do goal setting and kind of checking back in. So I think it's a part of the process as far as that self-compassion is a big part of it, right? We have in our sports program, you can kind of gauge your effort, and not your effort in terms of judgment, but effort as far as acknowledging, like, this is how much effort I've given into this. So if I'm not happy with the outcome, maybe the effort is what needs adjusting or needs to be adjusted. But I think journaling and self-reflection and gratefulness is a huge part of the process of self-growth. Erin, I don't know if you have more you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just think for me, like, some of the research that Rachel showed me is pretty cool, just about how like being negative towards yourself, and if you've made a mistake and you're harsh on yourself, it actually doesn't help you to learn any faster. Which, when I learned that, I was like, oh my God, I was like miserable for I don't know how many years in sport, thinking that being hard on myself was going to make me learn quicker. And it's not true at all. So that was a big realization, but also like the self-compassion and how you talk to yourself. And I've had the fortune of like working with the younger teams. And the cool thing about just chatting with them is this whole self-compassion piece. And I learned this a long time ago with one of my sports psychs. And he said to me, like, you know, after you've made a mistake, imagine your 5-year-old self. So the 5-year-old version of Erin McLeod. And like I said, I had my mullet, I had my like Adidas high tops, and, you know, I was like a little badass, or I thought I was anyway. And I just, you know, like if I had just made a big mistake, what would I say to the 5-year-old version of myself? And I try to remember that now, because I've been harsh to myself for so long that it's obviously going to take a while to totally unlearn it. But self-talk is such a huge piece, I think, of mindfulness, and even like a meditation practice. And I told this to Rachel too. She's probably getting bored of all these stories, but meditation, there are like so many stigmas around, just like mindfulness. Everyone's like, oh, just, you know, be mindful and mindfulness, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what does that even mean? But, you know, meditation was the same for me. I had heard about it and I was like, I don't really know what this is. I don't want to like sit and think about nothing. And I went to this conference. It was the Dalai Lama was speaking, and I like was taking my spot before he started speaking on the stage. And to my left, this guy had like a raw silk suit from head to toe on, with like Buddha beads from his wrists to his elbows. And the guy beside me, and that guy was like oming the whole time I was there. And the guy on my right had like, he was a white guy with dreads and like a t-shirt that said "Eat Kale" on it. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to understand any of this. But what was so cool about it is to have so many different people from different walks of life there to just find more peace. And I learned a lot about meditation, and that all it is the same as that breathing thing. It's just like bringing yourself to that moment. And like every time your mind shifts, like noticing that it shifts and then bringing it back to the breath. And it's funny because non-judgment is such a big part of it. I remember when I first started meditating and my mind would drift and I'd be like, oh, what are you doing? And I was like stressing myself out, and which a lot of people do when they try to meditate, because they think, well, I'm just going to think about nothing. But I read a quote the other day by one of the founders, John Kabat-Zinn of Mindfulness, who's like, trying to stop your thoughts is like trying to stop waves coming up on the sand. So it's not about stopping the thoughts. It's like noticing they're there and then coming back to the breath. And that practice is in sport and business and everything. But the self-compassion piece shifted huge for me. And now when my mind shifts and I come back to the moment, you know, I'm like, nice work, you know, and it's a small difference, but it makes a huge impact on self-worth and like day-to-day fulfillment. So I've really appreciated that part, and also just appreciating emotions. Just because you're more mindful doesn't mean you're not going to feel hurt or pain or all these things. It's you sit with them and you kind of go towards them and deal with the hard stuff. So I'm really proud of the shifts in my life. But and you know, the research from Rachel is like when you know you're like, you know, you got a golden egg, you want to share it. So
Absolutely. So I'm really curious. So here in Ottawa, you know, I'm a mental health speaker, advocate. Two of the things that I've been trying to incorporate the most, but have had trouble, is the journaling and the meditation aspect. And similar to what you were saying, like you hear a lot about these two things, especially with me being involved in that kind of that world. I've always had trouble even coming to grips with just sitting down and doing it. What my question is, and I don't know if you have the research or the data to support it, is there maybe a little bit more of a stigma with the mindfulness practice towards men? The reason I ask, and this is basically my own perception, is I'm from a small town. And when I think of talking to some of the people I went to high school with, and notably men, country boys and stuff, talking to them about mindfulness, they would laugh at me. You know, I'm just curious in that in your world, is that maybe, you know, something that's been acknowledged, or you know, am I just speaking on experience?
As far as my research is concerned, I didn't research anything specifically
Okay.
relating to gender. However, I would say in the same sense, my observation, I could see where that would be more of a barrier for men than it is for women. And I think it was interesting watching even my husband as I started researching this stuff and talking to him. And he's not really someone that worries about stigmas that much. But I think even for him, it's like he's a very logical person. So for him, it was kind of like, you know, like he took him a while to embrace kind of the research and embrace sitting and seemingly doing nothing. He's a very much like he's always doing stuff, and he's highly intelligent and always kind of like working on things. And I think for him, it was more just like sitting and feeling like you're doing nothing. But he started practicing mindfulness probably about 6 months after I did, and he saw a lot of great benefits from it. And I think my college students in this class that I'm telling you, I have a lot of athletes, and it's probably it's either half male, half female, or it might actually be more men than women in that class. But I was curious to see how if they would embrace it or not. And I spent about a week kind of at first just talking about mindfulness and kind of really helping them try to understand it and try to get rid of some of the stigma as far as introducing some male athletes that, you know, are involved with it. And like LeBron James, and like trying to help with that stigma. And they embraced it, even the coloring days. I'll be honest, I didn't know how some of these guys were going to do coloring days. And it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks in. So this is our third coloring session maybe. We had a technical difficulty, and the music cut off early, and I thought that it was done. And I went over and I realized, so I said, okay, you know, pick up your journals. And I realized, oh, we had 5 minutes left. And I said, well, we're done. And the whole class groaned. No, we want to keep doing it. My guys included. So I think that there can be a stigma, but if people are willing to get over that initial hump, just like with anything, right, then they see the same kind of benefits that the women are seeing.
Right. I'm gonna start with you and then move over to Erin. Some of the tips for meditation. So again, going back to that conversation, is everyone hears about meditation and they hear benefits, but I don't think a lot of people truly they think it's that, you know, sitting with your legs crossed and your fingers together going you know, like that's what everyone thinks meditation is. If you could, what are some like beginner tips to start the practice of at least meditation?
Honestly, in the research, there was even a suggestion by one of the researchers to start with as little as 10 seconds. Because for some people, I think you're exactly right, to actually sit down and feel like you have to take time to do this, or maybe you're embarrassed because of whatever stigma you feel. Literally, even just taking 10 seconds away from your desk or, you know, wherever, breathing in for 3 seconds, out for 4 seconds, you know, for just taking 10 seconds at a time, and then increasing from there. I think a lot of times people feel like they have to somehow have it all figured out. It's okay to feel a little uncomfortable at first. It's okay to feel a little weird about it at first. You know, maybe you even start with your eyes open if you feel weird closing your eyes. You know, and I think recognizing that it's a process, and just like training your body, training your brain takes time. And so starting with just a short amount, and also not judging yourself. If you don't feel like you're doing it quote unquote right, who cares? Like, it's really just about you're there and noticing if your brain wanders, bringing it back to the present moment, and cheering yourself on for that. I mean, that's a win. So I think in everyday life too, for me, I've talked about this in another interview that we did, but it can be done even by just focusing on one thing. For instance, I was getting in the van with my team one time, and something had really upset me right before I got in the van, not with my team, there's something extraneous. And I got in and I thought, man, this is not really good for me not to be in a good headspace. And I'm driving my team in a 15-passenger van. And so we were stopped at a stoplight. So I just literally focused on the taillight in front of me for, 10 seconds and just said, it's red, it's rectangular, there's 4 screws in it. I literally just made myself focus on that. And it brought my brain back to the present moment, and it put me in a better place to be driving my team. So it can be as simple as just taking, you're at your desk. It could be looking at your pen or pencil for 10 seconds and noticing the colors, noticing the shape. It doesn't even have to be eyes closed, legs crossed, like you're talking about.
Interesting. Erin, I don't know if you have anything to add on top of that, and maybe some specifics that maybe help you get through it, and when you started especially.
Yeah, I mean, I did start like leading up, probably 2011, leading up to the Olympics. But for me personally, like I'm still like trying to figure out what works best for me. I used to make fun of the yogis in my life, and now I like totally am into yoga. So it's always trial and error, but like very simple things are. Like when I was living with my roommates, my parents, for the last month, we would sit before dinner and we would do the breathe in for 3 and out for 4. And we would do 3 rounds of that before starting the meal. And what we noticed and that was it. And we just felt more calm, more present, and had really great conversations. We lit some candles. Like we just enjoyed being there in that moment. And along the lines of eating, like mindful eating is another practice. You can literally focus on the flavors, the textures. When I was doing my mindfulness-based stress reduction course, that was probably my least favorite video. But when you watch the instructor eat like 2 raisins, and he eats it, it's like 30-minute video of him eating 2 raisins. And I was like, okay, this is extreme. So again, you got to pick what works for you, but like, that's one way to do it. Like going for a walk and looking at the sky and the colors around you, or the trees or the leaves, like even if it's a split moment where you just take it in, that's mindfulness. So it appears in a lot of different ways. Again, like for me, I started doing body scans where you go from your toes all the way to your head, and you have like guided instruction focusing on your toes and then your ankles, and just it helps with body awareness and just relaxing you from your toes to your head. And if you're like me and your mind wanders, it's nice because it gives you kind of consistent instruction, so your mind can wander, and then the voice kind of helps you bring you back to the moment. And I'm trying to graduate to more just meditation where there's less guidance, and it's challenging. When people say meditation's easy, they're lying, or they've been doing it for a really long time. But it's a focus practice. Really, at the end of the day, it's a focus practice. You notice your mind drifting, you come back to the moment, and you can do that anytime. And the nice thing about working on your focus is the better your focus is, the better everything is. So like I said, it's about kind of finding what works for you. Like I'm totally into yoga now, and I just love the mind body connection, and just to like feel like I'm in my body and right here is something that I don't think I can say that I've felt my whole life, for sure.
Right. What I love about this conversation is, going into it, you think of mindfulness as this big process, this big kind of convoluted, complicated, okay, I got to be mindful, so I got to do this, and this. But when you break it down, the both of you, it's just like, I love that split moment, that moment just to focus on present is mindfulness. And it's like, oh, so it doesn't have to be so daunting. And, I don't know why I got myself so worked up about this concept of mindfulness, but it's nice to kind of have it put in those terms, that it's just simple. It's noticing the breeze, the trees. One thing before, we finish up, and I definitely want to touch on some of the projects you have going on at the Mindful Project. You mentioned off the top, and I did want to get to this, the no judgment. And I want to kind of touch on that and why that aspect is also really important when it comes to it. I spoke with Sarah Vizina a couple episodes ago, but we were talking about breaking down the ego and understanding yourself and going through the things and the walls you built up. Why is this no judgment concept important to this whole mindfulness area of practice?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things is that, like Erin talked about earlier, being hard on ourselves, science shows, doesn't actually make us better. And when we're judging ourselves for something, we're essentially, our brain is in the past, right? So when we essentially are saying like, oh, or we're predicting where we will or will not be in the future. And so our brain is not actually in the present moment. And so I think so often we think that we need to judge ourselves to somehow hold ourselves to a higher standard. But reality is that judging yourself and having goals or aspirations are very different because, for instance, for me, I was lucky enough to contract hepatitis A earlier this year, and so I got my my fitness destroyed, and I'm trying to get back into shape. And so every day that I am working on getting back into shape, I'm not where I want to be. And so I'm having to practice and say like, hey, but you actually got out there, you did this. This is more than you did, a week ago, 3 weeks ago. You weren't able to do anything. So it's really saying this is, maybe I want to be at a certain place, but if I'm not there yet, what did I do today? Because all we can control is our effort, and we can praise ourselves and be proud of ourselves for this effort. I was telling Erin this earlier today. I've been really working on self-compassion because, yeah, with anything that we're working on in life, we're often not where we maybe want to be, but still recognizing that we showed up today. We gave effort today. Or if we didn't give effort today, then you don't need to judge ourselves for it. Just note it and do better tomorrow. Erin, I know you'll have something to add to this.
Always, right? The long-winded one. No, I mean, I totally agree. Non-judgment is massive, and it's really, really hard, I think. But I also think, which is cool, and like our brains always want something to mean something. Like that's kind of, I feel like how we're hardwired, right? So the nice thing about a mindfulness practice is like the more you practice it, like when a new stimulus enters into your world, you react how you think it is going to affect you generally. But the more you practice mindfulness, a new stimulus comes into your world and you just see it for what it is. For example, has anyone ever been stuck in traffic? Yes. You're in traffic and you're like, your meeting's in 30 minutes and you're like, I'm going to be late for my meeting. They're going to think that I don't care because I'm showing up late, and it's going to reflect on me. They're going to think I'm a bad leader. Like we go through this whole thing, your stress, your heart rate, you're like, oh my God.
You're calling me out.
Yeah. Right. And literally like the more and more you practice mindfulness and this non-judgment piece, you're like literally just sitting in a bunch of cars. You know what I mean? It is what it is. And it's crazy. Like at first when I was like getting into this, I'm like, this is BS. I do not believe this. But like the other day, I don't know if, my dad has a soda stream when I was with my roommates. And so I'm like trying this soda stream and I didn't know it was broken. But anyway, totally busted. So I put the water bottle underneath and literally it sprays all over my body. I'm drenched. And my reaction is, oh, I think this is broken. You know what I mean? 5 years ago, I would have been like livid. I would have like chasing my dad down, like, what did you, you know what I mean? Like, and it is what it is. And it's crazy. And why I think it's so relevant as well for athletes or for whatever you're doing is, one of my favorite basketball quotes by Michael Jordan is about like he's been 26 times was given the opportunity to win the game winning shot. And he failed. And if he would have reacted, if he hadn't practiced his mindfulness, he wouldn't have taken those game-winning shots because he would have based it on what happened in the past. So to like totally be in that moment is such an important practice because, you close so many doors because you think this is how it's going to affect you. So I think that's the biggest thing for me that I was like, wow, this is the non-judgment piece is huge, but also just seeing the world without like, your tunnel scared vision goggles. And it's more just like seeing things the way that they are. And sometimes that's hard to see, but at least it's more honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a time like, the pandemic where we're at right now. And I look at myself working from home and I find that such a struggle to be as productive as I might've been in the office. And that's definitely a thought I've had. It's like, beat yourself up about it. I'm not doing a good job. Am I going to get fired? You go down that line. But when, you put it to, I think a lot of people are going through that part and it's important. So here's a great example of where mindfulness can really come in handy for everybody. This pandemic, I think, is a perfect example of using these practices to compassion. It's huge.
An interesting thing on that too is the fact that if we show more self-compassion to ourselves, then we're more likely to show it to others. Because, if we're sitting in traffic and we are recognizing like, look, I can't do anything about it, then how much kinder are we going to be to someone else that gets stuck in traffic? Which is then going to create this environment where we're not judging each other. That's something that I've worked on a lot with my team is it's like if we're not judging ourselves so much, then we're kinder to each other. And it creates this environment to where we're not afraid to fail because we're not afraid to get called out or made fun of for something. And then you thrive as a result of it. So it has that effect. Not only are we kinder to ourselves, but to others as well.
I want to go through everybody on Twitter and just every time I see a comment, just post a clip of this conversation just under them when they're going off about things. Just here you go. So before we wrap up, I do want to touch on the Mindful Project, what you two founded. You talked a little bit and you referenced some programs that you have available and that you've implemented with things. What are you aiming to get, everybody, children? Is it sport focused? Like what's kind of like that target that you're trying to go after with the project?
We initially created the program for kind of the elementary school age, 6 to 12-year-olds, because that's that age that they're really able to, digest the material and be able to. Their brains are very moldable at that time of life. We've had groups as young as 4 to 6 use it as well and really got a lot out of it. But then we had just our lives. I'm involved in the college world, and then also we just have a lot of people wanting this type of program for obvious reasons as far as anxiety, stress, whatever. So we also have an adult program and then also basically like a teen program as well. And then we have a sports specific program and then we have a non-sport specific program. So, kind of trying to meet the needs that are out there as best we can. Clearly, us being so embedded in the sports world, sports is a huge thing. But as you know, this is not only vital for sports, but just for life. So we are kind of looking at both.
Yeah, no, I know sports is the ones that really embraced it. I work for a media company here in Canada, and I work in radio, and I know their practice, from our CEO down, that they really preach that mindfulness practice, and they have a whole bunch of programs around it, and they're trying to implement it. But even with myself, I'm a speaker with Do It for Darren, which is the hockey youth mental health and I kind of agree with what you were saying about the youth, and it's like my belief too is tackling not the issues, but giving them that foundation when they're young, so they have those tools that as they progress more in life and through the dramatic years of our teens and college and then into our professional lives, that they've already learned all this stuff and they're not trying to learn it once they've been in their career for 30-40 years and entrenched in their ways. So I think it's huge that it's a great thing to reach the kids.
Well, when Erin came to me with this idea originally, we were talking back and forth, but then she's like, hey, what if we actually create a program like that? She really was saying, I want to give back and I really want to reach these kids, because if I only could have known what I know, now, how much better could I have been? And then plus when you just see the stats of the anxiety and the stress and the depression and the suicides and suicidal thoughts and all of this stuff that kids are experiencing at such a young age, it just feels like, how can you not, try to reach out and help them while they're young. An interesting note in my research, this is, again, a little nerdy side here, but by age 12 or 13, kids actually have the majority of their emotional vocabulary. And so this actually allows them to digest and talk about their feelings, because a lot of times I feel like especially middle-aged men are told, you don't talk about your emotions enough. Well, a lot of times they actually don't have the words to say, because boys especially weren't asked to talk about it when they were young, where girls probably were. And so that's an interesting thing too, is by, hitting these classes or these sports teams and actually getting boys to be able to talk about their feelings and to be able to actually identify what's going on in their brain, then they're going to be able to talk about it better later in life, because it actually expands their emotional vocabulary as well, which I think can only help for all areas of life.
like, yeah, that is a great point. That, I think of people my age, and even leading up to my dad's age, that, yeah, you ask them how they're feeling, and they couldn't even tell you. They're like, I'm sad and angry, but I don't really know, like that, never really thought about it like that in those terms. But that's like, yeah, you just hit the nail on the head for so many people I know. It's unbelievable. Listen, you guys have graced me with your knowledge, and I really, really appreciate it. And you've cleared up a lot of questions I know I've had, and I really look forward to sharing this with everybody, because I know it's a lot of, a topic that people hear about, like I said, don't know about. And I think this really cleared up a lot of things people may have been thinking when it comes to mindfulness. If people want to get in touch with you, see more on your programs, where can they go? Where can they find you? Social media, website, personals?
Was that me? Okay, sorry. Yeah, you can find mindfulproject.ca is our main website. And basically everything is on there. We actually have a free program right now for 8 to 12-year-olds or younger, a little bit older. I think everyone could actually benefit from it on our site. It's the at-home program for people and young people dealing with stress around coronavirus and being at home and, this ever-changing situation. So that is for free, and you can see it on our main page. As far as emailing us directly, I think you can actually email Erin at mindfulproject.ca or Rachel at mindfulproject.ca. That's probably the quickest way, and we can get back to you pretty quickly. But yeah, most of the information on the programs is on mindfulproject.ca. We also have a lot of resources, a lot of cool things to check out on the site. So on our Instagram, Rachel's in charge of our Instagram, so our Twitter handle's different, so I'm going to let you take this, Rachel.
Yeah, so you can reach out if you just go on our website. It actually has all of our handles that are there. You can click on. Also, you can reach us just by, there's a contact submission form there as well. So yeah, we're happy to talk with you further if you want more information. On Instagram, we're _mindful_project. So that's our Instagram handle there. People want to reach out to us there. And then our Twitter and Facebook are on the main page there of our
I do remember all of them.
Yeah, I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'm looking at it, I don't have it.
That's why I was like, Rachel, you got it.
I hear you. No, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you very much for having us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for having us.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.